I guess people are very eager to start. So Jonathan, our beloved DPL, please share with us our bits. And if people could keep an eye on questions on IRC, then they can raise them.
Great. Hello, everybody. Thank you. Any questions? Welcome to Bits from the DPL. It's almost surreal because this is my third DPL term and the first time I actually get to speak at DebConf. So it's wonderful to be here and nice to see you all in person. So thanks to everyone who's come from so far and had to put so much effort into just getting here in the first place. It's just been great to meet all the familiar faces again and all the new people coming along as well. Can I see who's here at DebConf for the first time? Oh, quite a few. Who's from Kosovo or surrounding countries? Quite a few people too. So yeah, definitely a good mix of all the new faces. So yeah, I've done a few talks before as DPL. Most of this talk's content comes from these previous 4 talks, but I also added a bunch of introductory content because I know there's a lot of new people who's interested in Debian, who wants to learn about Debian. But if you're interested in some of the things I say in this talk, there's probably a lot more deeper content in some of these talks that's available on PeerTube and YouTube. Yeah, so also, what's the next slide? That's a cool slide, I think. So I'm from South Africa. That's in Cape Town. That's way at that bottom pixel in South Africa. I learned while coming here that I could have even drove here, but it would have taken about a month, so that's not such a great idea. Or 7 days if I could drive without refueling, taking a break, or eating, or anything like that. So if you need anything, you can contact me at leader@debian.org. And even right now, if you have any questions, you can even ask me on RSC right now. I'm almost always on RSC, even during my DPL talks. The channel is #DebConf Drini. That's this room's RSC channel. And yeah, you can even, if you have a question or comment, or even if you want to heckle, you can do that anytime as well during this talk. The only condition is that you have to have a mic before you start talking, otherwise people on the stream, they won't be able to hear you. So put your hands up, and we have 2 people with mics. They'll run to you, and once you have a mic in front of you, you can start speaking. Or message me on RSC. Either way, I'm high voltage if you want to highlight me. So more about me. I started learning about computers on a little thingy like that. Kids today will think it's really ancient. It only had 40K of RAM, 48Ks of RAM. But I learned basic on this, typing games out of books because games was all that computers were good for. And from there it escalated into more serious stuff over the years. So yeah. Later on, I became obsessed with DOS and Windows when we got a more decent computer, and me and my friends hang out in a computer store, and it was our dream to work there. I eventually got a job at that same computer store, but hated fixing computers all day and working with Windows. It became really tiresome and troublesome quickly, so I decided I'm done with computers, never working with it again. I'm done with it, I'm changing careers. And that same year, in about 2002, I discovered Linux and open source again, which I played with before, and just got hooked. And later in 2002, I removed Windows from my computer and just got sucked deeper and deeper into the free software and open source rabbit hole, and haven't found out where it ends yet, but it just goes on and on and on. So yeah, since the last 20 years or so, I've been working in free software and open source and enjoying it. It's good and fulfilling. And yeah, I hope that people who are new, who are thinking of getting involved, I hope they also have a positive experience like I did. So what does a DPL do? The DPL is some external and internal functions. This is not an exclusive list, but it's a good summary of just to give you an idea what the DPL does. So there's a bunch of external functions like representing the Debian project. It's sort of a contact point where people from the outside want to contact Debian and get in touch with the project. Talk about Debian at events like DebConf, although obviously with COVID, it was really difficult to do much of that. And handles legal stuff, listens to project members. There's lots of listening to project members. That's a very important part of being a DPL, and I try to prioritize that over everything else, which I think is often useful. Maintain team delegations. So in Debian, the Debian project leader doesn't have much powers by themselves. How it works is they delegate powers to teams, and then those teams can take action. And ideally, the DPL has as little power or direct control over the project as possible. DPL approves budgets and expenses, and works with Treasury team on finances. Hello, Cowboy Penguin, who says hello from Texas. So what is Debian? We're a community. Debian is a completely community-built project. So there's many projects with communities out there, but Debian was purposely built from the beginning to be a project by a community, and it's quite unique. There's other projects like this that exist, but not quite on the scale of Debian, and that does all the things we do to make Debian useful in large organizations, like having stable releases, having security updates, and that kind of thing. So yeah, I mentioned we're self-governed. We have a few documentations that define how we work. I'm not going to go into too detail about them, but there's some links on that page, and these slides will be available on the DebConf 22 website if you want to follow it up or read up on it at some point. In a nutshell, this is a summary of a social contract I got from Wikipedia. So in Debian, we basically make some promises to our users, and that's that Debian will remain open and free. So you can pay someone for Debian if you want, but it will always be available as open and free. You can use it yourself, and you don't have to pay anyone if you don't want to. But if you want to pay someone for services or stuff like that, that's possible. We want to be good citizens in the free software community. So wherever we can give back or contribute or be a good player or a good citizen in the free software community, that we try to do as well. We don't hide any of our problems. So the biggest point there is that our bug tracker is open. We don't hide our problems. We also want to stay focused on the users and the software that started the phenomenon. And we make it possible for software to be used with non-free software. So in Debian, all our software is free and open source, but we have an extra, what we call the non-free component, where it's possible to install additional non-free software from. That makes it a bit safer and more convenient than downloading it from a bunch of random sites on the internet. So that's a social contract in a nutshell. But the most important part for us is that our system remains completely open and free. Years ago, Debian had some slow releases, which gave it a reputation at the time for being very slow to release. But the last 15 years or so, Debian has done a pretty decent job of releasing every 2 years. I think our release team had a good idea, because in Debian, our policies, we release when it's ready, not by a deadline. But the trick that they've developed is that we have timed freezes instead of timed releases. So the idea is that we freeze at a specific time, and from that point, we work as fast as possible to get the system in a releasable state. So the project itself, we're not technically registered as an organization ourselves. We work through 3 trusted organizations. In the non-profit world, they call these fiscal sponsors. And those 3 organizations that we work off is SPI. They're incorporated in the US. They're a non-profit there. That was originally founded for Debian, but over the years, they got other projects like Debian that they supported as well. And they've grown into a massive project now that supports dozens of free software projects for their finances, for their legal stuff, and things like that. Then later on, we had Debian France as well, also founded specifically for Debian. They only serve Debian as well, along with Debian Switzerland in 2017. And on top of that, we work through these companies when we need to interface with the outside world. But other than that, we have no company that tells us what we're supposed to do, how we're supposed to do it. We make all those decisions within our community, using all the tools that's available for us as defined by our constitution, and coming to DebConf and talking about things. So our structure brings us with some problems. Like SPI is absolutely a good thing, and I want to support them, but they're very slow for many of the things that we needed from them, and it's becoming a bigger and bigger issue as time goes by. They want to standardize how they work across the projects as well, which makes completely sense. But for Debian, who's the very largest of all the projects at SPI, we tend to need lots more special cases and need much more edge cases, and we typically need things faster as well. So it has become a bit of a problem relying on them for everything. So we've been trying to find some solutions for that. Our problem is not being technically registered as some form of organizations means some personal legal liability. So if someone wants to sue Debian, it might put some risks on its individual members, where if we had a registered legal entity, then that entity would be responsible and could shield us more. So also we have the 3 trusted organizations, but we don't have any formal agreement with all of these. So Debian France and Debian Switzerland has nice clauses in their own constitution that says that if they would have to close down, they would donate all their money back to SPI, all the money they have for Debian back to SPI. So at least we know that if something would go wrong with them, the money would go back to somewhere it belongs. Unfortunately, a few years ago, one of the TOs we used, FFIS, they just disappeared. We don't know what happened to them. And they had quite a bit of money with them, and we don't seem to have much of a legal recourse because we never had an agreement with them. There's no contract, there's nothing on paper. And for me, this puts quite a big risk on Debian as well. And these problems have been bothering me for quite some time, and I'd like to do something about it. Odix says Debian.ch goes back to at least 2011. I think I made a mistake, yes. I think probably they updated the bylaws in 2017 and I got the wrong date there. So they go back to 2011. Thanks for that, Odix. And he posts some extra notes on RSC as well. Some initial thoughts. So this isn't a strategy or plan or something that we're definitely going to do, but I'd like to get some professional consultants in to give us some help, to look at, to understand deeply on how we work and why we work this way, and give us some proper advice so that we can make better decisions. From what my initial amateur, non-expert research on the topic, Debian Switzerland is a very good form of setup. All we need to do is put together some documentation saying what your purpose is, put together a constitution basically. You have a meeting and then you have an organization formed that can basically do everything we need. You don't even need a bank account, which might be helpful because then we can just continue working through our TOs as we do now, but we can have proper relationships with them and definitions of what we expect from a trusted organization. So yeah, I don't want to do away with TOs, and if we do have an organization in Switzerland, it only becomes, there's only additional work when we keep more than 100,000 Swiss franc there. That said, these are just some thoughts, but yeah, I've been having some trouble initializing driving this, mostly because there's so much other things happening. And the problem is you look for a good time to do certain things in Debian, but there's just never a good time because there's always stuff happening. There's always a DebConf or a release or some crisis. And sometimes I'm like Commander Wolf, who says that Klingons do not procrastinate, it's a tactical delay. But sometimes you just have to realize that we just have to start the process now, because if you wait for the perfect time, it's never going to happen. So there's lots that we would have to do along those lines if we do it. My ideal view is that if we have a new minimal thin layer of organization that can act as Debian, that can take care of all these things that we need to take care of, then I'd like that organization's constitution to basically be integrated with Debian somehow, in the sense that maybe its constitution says that its functions are basically defined by Debian, so that the members of the Debian project are basically a member of that organization too, and there's basically a one-on-one mapping of control over it, so that this project can't also grow into some other monster that does weird things. So the pandemic has been quite difficult. I think I probably don't need to explain that to everyone. You probably all know what that means on various levels. It definitely had an effect on us not being able to go to meetings or organize events like this. But there's been a few good things that came out of it. We had a bunch of online events, more than we've ever had before in 2020. Tried a bunch of new things. The Brazilian team hosted Fique em Casa, Use Debian, which means stay at home and use Debian in Portuguese. This was a nice event. It was a month long, and every evening they had talks, well, one talk per evening for 30 days. So this was nice because if you couldn't make it one or two evenings, then you just miss a very small fraction of the entire event. I think we should maybe try something like that in Debian again. And then we had our first online mini DebConf. We've never done that before. It was a good educational experience because we just went ahead and without too much planning, but it was nice because we learned a lot of things that we could use for the first actual online DebConf. And DebConf 20 was a lot of fun. We enjoyed it. We had some interactive components to it, and it was nice that a lot of people from all over the world who couldn't make DebConf in a while could participate. Other people who've never been to DebConf before. It was just really nice. It was a nice community event. There was also Mini DebConf Online Gaming Edition that was just focused on gaming in Debian, because gaming is getting better and better in Debian. It's actually one of the nicer major systems out there to play games on these days. Arguably after Windows, for all the AAA titles. But it was fun, and people are still messaging me every few weeks of when are we doing it again. Although if I had another themed online mini DebConf, I'd probably want to focus it on education or business, or I think we should maybe try the same idea for different themes. And then Brazil and India also had online mini DebConfs. Then last year we did DebConf 21 again online, but unfortunately it was not as much fun as the first online DebConf. I think we got fatigued of online events, and we got bored, And not to the discredit of anyone who organized it, but it did feel a bit like a zombie DebConf. And I'm glad that we don't have to do another online one this year, because I think if we did, we'd have to try to reinvent it somehow. And in person just works so much better. And we also added some new services. We added our own Jitsi instance for Debian. This allows us to do Jitsi video calls using free software, so we don't have to use Zoom or Skype or anything else that's nasty in a bunch of different ways. Jitsi has its bugs too, but at least for the most part it works. You can find it at jitsi.debian.social. We got our own PeerTube instance. I've tried for years to get our DebConf videos on something that's nice and point and clicky like YouTube, and I think about 3 years ago we got PeerTube going on. It's a federated platform that so different PeerTube instances that exist out there can connect to each other, and then they share their videos. So this avoids the problem you had with old video sites where everything was isolated and difficult to connect to each other. And all our DebConf videos from previous years are on there as well. At some point I'd like to promote it more for tutorials and other useful things that people can upload from the Debian community. But both Jitsi and PeerTube.debian.social is part of another project called Debian.social that a few of us are working on. So the idea is that we host a bunch of sites that make it nicer to communicate and interact with each other, mostly tools that are useful for online things. At some point we might have enough to make conferences a lot nicer as well. So far we've only done this ad hoc and asynchronously on RSC. We've had no meetings for Debian Social yet, but our first in-person meeting for that is actually at this DebConf on July the 23rd. So if you have any questions or want to get involved or just want to see what it's about, you can join us at 10 o'clock in Erenuku. Okay, and then that little team that we put together to host these, those sites brings me to another similar project that came from a similar idea. So as DPL, well, in Debian we have lots of people who host their own sites for Debian. That goes unofficial that's not hosted by the official Debian system administrators, can be hosted under Debian.net. This has been like this for a long time. But since my first term, lots of people ask for either for money for hosting sites, or they ask where can they host it because they have no idea. And everyone hosts at different places, and it's more paperwork to get all of these individually reimbursed. So what we did is we got Debian Switzerland to get accounts at DigitalOcean and Hetzner. And then there's a process on that bottom URL where you can just request a VM, and Debian will get a VM created and pay it, and it's just a lot less effort and paperwork for everyone involved. So if you want to host something for Debian, that's the two processes you want to go through to get the domain name and get hosting for it. Now on to firmware. This I talked to 2 months ago in Germany as well. Steve has a lot to say. He's hosting a BOF about that. I'll get to that in a second. But laptops, desktops, computers basically, more and more rely on firmware non-free firmware blobs to function. So in the past, I've always used the completely free Debian installer to install my laptops or desktops. And then I install, if I need something non-free, I just enable non-free and install the little pieces that I actually need. And typically on laptops, that was just the IWL Wi-Fi driver. Except with this laptop that I bought, because I didn't even get graphics when I started it up. Once Debian installer starts, I just get a black screen, which was quite annoying. And unless I booted to BIOS mode, which less and less laptops these days have as well, I couldn't get even a basic text mode. And Intel is replacing the AC97 cards with the soft audio. That needs non-free blobs as well, otherwise you simply get no audio on your device. Many Ethernet cards and Wi-Fi cards just seem to getting worse. The other problem with Ethernet cards is that many new laptops don't even have Ethernet cards. Ethernet adapters, which are quite annoying, so that means that if you want to install from some medium and then later on want to install additional drivers, it does make it quite difficult. So we sit on different spectrums on how useful we find installation media without non-free firmware, but unfortunately, wherever you sit on that spectrum, the installation media without free firmware is getting less and less useful, because our computers are basically becoming these network. One computer these days is a network of computers all running their own little pieces of blobs of software, and I don't think there's anything we as Debian can really do about that for a typical laptop or phone these days. About 2 months ago, NVIDIA announced that they're releasing releasing a bunch of open source GPU kernel modules. That was very exciting when we saw that, because NVIDIA is typically one of our biggest problems on Linux. But then the next day, I came across the tweet from Hector Martin. He's from Asahi Linux. He's really good when it comes to reverse engineering stuff, and he's been doing a lot of works to get the M1 Max working on Linux. So he says, so NVIDIA released the kernel drivers open source, by which they mean they moved most of it to firmware and made the open source driver call into it. There are almost 900 functions implemented in the 34 megabytes of firmware, give or take from what I can see. He goes and makes, it's a nice thread, you can look it up at this URL, but his conclusion is, a question to ponder: is this a licensing hack? NVIDIA wasn't allowed to use DPL-only kernel exports due to linking with a blob. Now the blob runs on another CPU, but it's still remote procedure calls. Is that linking? Does it make a philosophical difference? And it's kind of a good question, I think, because I don't have any kind of answer for that, except accepting that, my computer is actually a bunch of different computers, and I don't have control over most of them. So this is where I think in Debian we should really embrace projects that want to work on free hardware, because it might be that that's our only future for running completely free Debian systems somewhere, at least in the short and medium term. Or maybe more medium term, since most of this hardware doesn't quite exist yet. So there's things like RISC-V. Can I see, who knows what RISC-V is, or have some idea? Okay, almost half, if I gauge correctly. So their aim is to create a completely free hardware CPU, so basically an open source CPU, or more specifically a open standard instruction set architecture for RISC CPUs. So the idea is that you can use this as a start to make a completely open source computer from the hardware, or all the way from the hardware. And this is something that I think we should start embracing in Debian, and at least get enough hardware so that most Debian developers have access to it, or can easily find one. If you need to buy a RISC-V board, you can get in touch with me, and the project will definitely get that. Then, currently, the images with firmware on it is very difficult to get from our website when you want to download Debian. I think it gives you the free netinst ISO by default, which is probably one of the worst images for newcomers. but I think it would be better to have an easy selection where you have a free image and a non-free image, or at least free with non-free firmware, and let the users make the best choice for themselves. If you tell them you probably want this one if you have a desktop or a laptop, my guess is they'll be able to make an educated decision on their own. And we can also use it as a bit of a platform to educate people, and maybe they can get on our side and help us and make better choices when they go buy hardware instead of just never thinking about it. Currently, on our images of non-free firmware, we enable all of non-free and contrib to be able to do that. So another thing that we've briefly discussed on mailing lists is this bug report to move firmware out of non-free into its own pocket that we call a component. So the idea is that you can have just non-free firmware enabled for those images so that you don't get users to accidentally install non-free software on their systems after they've done a Debian installation that needs firmware to work. It's been a bit quiet the last few weeks, this bug report, but it sounds like FTP team, at least some members on FTP team are aboard on it, but we'll also need to get that moving a bit if we want to get this done for Bookworm. So basically the short-term strategy is split out firmware into its own component, produce ISOs that has that enabled. Whether that should be the default or not is the part that we don't all agree on, and that will need further discussion. Steve intends to start a general resolution on that, and I think it's a good idea that we all vote on it, because then we have a project-wide decision that's made, and then we can move forward on that. And I think we should have a longer-term strategy too. Ideally, I would like organizations like the Free Software Foundation and OSI to do this kind of campaigning, to go to companies like Realtek or whatever and tell them, look, there's some benefits to using free hardware, there's benefits to using free software and using open specifications for your hardware. And maybe most companies will say no, they're not interested, it doesn't fit with their business model. But if eventually a few come around, if one come around, I think that whole effort will be worthwhile. Not sure if that fits in well with the kind of things we do in Debian, but someone should be doing this, and it seems like no one is really doing this kind of campaigning and working with hardware manufacturers like that. I just noticed I missed some RC messages because my network seemed to have disappeared for a minute or two, but I think it's fine. Network is gone again. So yeah, this is the short-term strategy that I think we should consider. This is when the bids of favor session is. At DebConf, bids of favor sessions are sessions where we get together and discuss a problem and try to find solutions for it. So that's the Sunday at 10 o'clock in this room, and that's for 45 minutes. So you can see more information on that URL that also links to Steve's blog post with some more information on this. And I'm glad to see someone from Western Digital visiting us as well, because they're also doing lots of interesting RISC-V stuff. So I'm hoping you can maybe at some point talk to us a little about that as well. Yeah, so then Debian 12 freezes. A freeze is always approaching, even if it's far away, but it's basically in the beginning of next year that our transition and toolchain freeze starts. And release team says, please plan accordingly. I think it's important to say what that means. That means make sure you finish your work by these freezes, because we've had a case last release cycle where someone started to transition the day before, or I can't remember if they started or intended to start the day before transition freeze, and the release team said, no. This isn't when you should, that's not the deadline for starting transitions, that's the deadline for when it should be done and dusted, basically. Also, if you have features that you want to get into Debian, if you realize you can't make it, there's always the next release, and at least it buys you more time to do it properly for the next release. Rushing too much in and creating too much load for everyone isn't really worthwhile. There's always backports and other ways to get stuff in, available for stable releases if needed. That's sometimes a better strategy. And they've also recently sent out an email asking you to triage your RC bugs. So please go through your RC bug lists and make sure, make some plan with them. Then also for Debian 12, we need someone to coordinate the artwork selection. That's basically someone who works with the desktop team to do a call for artwork, set up some wiki pages to host all of these artwork suggestions, and setting up a poll so that someone can choose which one is best. And then basically gathering it from the winning selection for packaging, and basically just manage that whole life cycle of selecting artwork for the Debian release. I did it the last 2 releases, but I'm just too busy for that, and it's not that difficult work, and I can also help you if you're interested. So if you'd like to get involved and take ownership of that release, then please get in touch or read the call for contributions on that link below. So it seems like I'm not doing too bad on time. There's still some, like 6 or 7 minutes left for questions. No heckles even. Is it having a talk after lunch or the heat? I know I didn't make enough jokes. Sorry, I had lots of content that I had to go through.
Just stand up. Hi. Just to go back to the point you were making about organizations and trusted organizations, having spent some time on SPI's board, I fully understand the concerns about the delays. How do you think yet another organization creates extra manpower and extra desire to do the tasks that at the moment are being done by volunteers who want to do them but don't necessarily have enough time to do them, or feel they have enough authority to do them? That seems to be the problem that needs solved rather than yet another organization. Mm-hmm. Another organization might help, but on its own is not sufficient, I feel. Do you have thoughts about how that should work?
Yeah. So the idea is not to have this as an additional TO. The idea is to have an extra organization as something that is very specifically Debian. So like I said, our membership would basically be 1-to-1. We should have, we already have offices in Debian. So the idea is that we expand that a bit so that we have a kind of a core group of senior Debian people who would be responsible for, taking, we already have people in Debian who want to do work, but then we're stunted by having to do that through trusted organizations who might not have the time. Maybe they have a small board and the small board is busy or away for a while. Or even in the case of SPI, we wait weeks for something, we badgered them a bit, they said no, they're going to do it, we wait another few weeks. But on our side, we could have done it in a day or sometimes less on some of those things that we've waited a long time. So getting volunteers to do stuff will still be a problem, but so far, we've had people who want to do specific things and they were basically blocked for long times because of that. So at least it would make it possible for us to do more things ourselves that we currently have to wait for externally, because it wouldn't be another external TO, it would be us. So I think that's how it, maybe not solves it completely, but that's how it addresses it to a large degree. I'm sorry if someone asked on RSC because it seems like my network is a bit weird.
So, this is your 3rd DPL term. How's it going?
You tell me. I'd like to have more feedback. I think it's going okay. There's lots of things that we are working on at the moment. You're involved in some of them, especially legal stuff. I wish I had more time to focus on community growth and that kind of thing. Legal and organizational stuff is a bit more boring, but they have to be done, and I'd like them to be done in this term, or at least mostly done in the rest of this term, so that it makes it easier for the next DPL and the project going forward as well.
Could you possibly be interested in a fourth term?
I knew that question was coming. You should come to my next talk. It starts in about 3 seconds. It's called Top 3 Reasons High Voltage Shouldn't Run for DPL Again. I actually have some reasons. So there's some personal reasons. I want to focus on my own well-being a bit, because it's very time-consuming being a DPL. Need to put more effort into my relationships. I also think that in this term, I should be able to do what I set out to do, and I don't want to be DPL for the sake of DPL, being DPL another term. No one else has been DPL for more than 3 terms, and I can't think of a good reason myself to do that. And also, after I'm DPL, I'm not going away. In fact, there's so much technical stuff I've been wanting to do that I just don't have the time for, and coming back to doing more technical stuff in Debian will make me very happy. So yeah, I shouldn't run for DPL again, but yeah. Any last question, or is that it?
You mentioned a board at SPI. Do you think that there would be a board of directors for this future Debian organization in the near future, maybe?
I don't know. I think we'll have to decide it collectively, but like I said, we have what we call offices in Debian, which I'm going to look it up for what it's worth. I might just need a second to start up Firefox. Yeah, so basically, I think yes. They could be an expansion of our current, what we call offices in Debian. My network is just a bit bad, but if you look up Debian's organizational structure, you'll see there's, on the top, the offices, I think, is currently the DPL, is it the sysadmins, and treasury team, I feel, should be on there, but they're currently not. But I think if we can get teams like that to represent the offices of the project, then they would basically effectively act as some form of committee or board. And it would be people who already do work on Debian. Personally, I don't like the idea of having a board that just sits there and doesn't do much. I think those... because then you end up always assuming someone else on the board will take in actions as they come. It would be nice if, people inside the treasury team decides, if there's a financial question that come in, they know someone on there should be responsible for taking it, and so on. That's something we absolutely have to discuss in more detail and figure out within Debian. And I don't want to dictate that, but that's kind of currently, with my current knowledge I have now, I think that's probably along the lines that we'll go with.
Hello. You just have a slide for the RISC-V. As you know, we still don't have a RISC-V portal box. So I hope we can have a portal box soon for RISC-V.
Yep.
Thank you.
I hope so. He's been working on it. He didn't mention that, but I hope so too. There is work happening to get porter boxes and buildies and that kind of thing for RISC-V, so hopefully that gets sorted out too.
Okay, I propose this was the last question. Let's give a big round of applause for our DPL.